The whole team just stood there crying, just everyone's crying openly, and we're just filming this moment of watching this big, dominant male bear drag himself like that.
How has your ability to photograph polar bears changed as sea ice reduces?
There's still some ice out there, and there's still bears out there, but we are finding skinnier and skinnier bears out there, and I think as the famous bear that we filmed recently, the dying polar bear, we can't prove that that's because of climate change. We can't prove that that's because of a lack of ice, but I have found more dead bears that have starved to death. And again, I don't just go look for my own data set of my own photographs, and I go talk to the scientists. When I talk to the scientists in Alaska, and they're saying, yeah, we're finding dead bears that are floating out in the open ocean, when we're finding bears that are having to swim over 400 miles to get from ice to land, that's not how they've evolved. They have not evolved. So what's happening with ice is that it's melting earlier every spring, and it's freezing later every fall. Bears, if they have enough fat, are designed to go for fairly long periods of a few months without eating. But imagine now that ice that melts in an area that used to historically have ice year-round is now melting in June and July and disappearing, and it's not freezing till October. That bear now has to survive for 6 months without ice. Bears are not omnivores. They can't live on vegetation and seaweed. They must eat meat. They eat seals. So without ice, bears need ice in order as a platform to hunt seals. So it's very basic math, and it's just trying to keep using the power of photography to keep reminding people of this simple math.
How did you find the emaciated bear and describe what you saw?
I was on an expedition. A very generous supporter of Sea Legacy invited us to come up on his boat and show him around the Arctic. They had just announced that they were going to create a marine protected area in Lancaster Sound. I thought, well, let's at least go celebrate that and talk about the importance of creating marine protected areas. Celebrate Trudeau's target of creating 10% of marine protected areas in Canada by 2020. Seemed like a step in the right direction. But near the end of the expedition, we come around the corner and we see looked like basically snow on top of a rock. And then as it moved a little bit, I could see that it was just this emaciated polar bear draped over a rock. And I called in the Sea Legacy team, so they came up to the north. We brought all our cinematic equipment and all our gear, and we, the only thing we could do at this moment of seeing this bear was film it. And so we got on land a long distance away, and we waited for hours, and waiting to see if the bear was dead or going to die, or we didn't know what it was going to do, but it just eventually slowly woke up and labored to its feet and dragged itself across the tundra. It looked like The Walking Dead, and we were hiding in an old Inuit settlement and like a little outpost camp, and so we wouldn't be in view. If the bear couldn't see us, we didn't want to affect its behavior, and it dragged itself towards a garbage can and was eating an old foam burnt snowmobile seat or a motorcycle seat and just salivating, and you could see that he was not long for this world, hours, maybe days. And then he didn't get any food there, and he just slowly walked down to the ocean and got into the ocean and swam off around an island. And then, it's just, we were just, the whole team just stood there crying, just everyone's crying openly, and we're just filming this moment of watching this big, dominant male bear drag himself like that. For me, what was important about that is when scientists say that 30% of the population of polar bears is going to disappear by the year 2050, and they're going to disappear as a species. They'll become extinct in the next 100 years plus. I want people to know that's just not science. That's just not data points falling off a piece of paper. This is what it looks like. That's all I was trying to say with that video is, this is what a starving polar bear looks like. They're dying. Ultimately, they're going to disappear because of the lives and the impact that we've had on this planet. Are you okay with that? And obviously it brought out the deniers and the haters and all the pushback, but there was more good and positive that came out of it than the negativity. And through the metrics that we did, we got over 2 billion views apparently, 2 billion impressions on that video, and that's powerful. It was the #1 climate change story in the year in 2017. It was the most viral video in the history of National Geographic. Christina's picture was one of Time Magazine's top 10 images of the year. And if we did get 2 billion, if it's not 2 billion, it's 1 billion or 700 million, who cares? It's like it reached a good chunk of the planet, and that is the power of a camera.
The polar bear through the window photograph. How did that happen?
Oh, I was working in Svalbard, Norway, and through the climate change, we had to put the story on hold for a few years. Historically, there's ice surrounding Svalbard, and for the few years, just due to loss of ice and warming temperatures, there was no ice. And so we kept putting it on hold, and finally I found a guide I could work with, Carl Erik Wilhelmsen, and we agreed to go out on our snowmobiles and try and document polar bears. But we were having a hard time finding them because there was no sea ice. There was just this little strip along land, and we were sitting out a blizzard in this little cabin, and we played a lot of Yahtzee, and we were just hanging out and waiting for the weather to improve, and all of a sudden I looked up and there's this polar bear staring at me through the window. But it was an image I wanted to make. It was one I was excited, it was one I had sketched out. I mean, these bears, when they're hungry, they get into trouble, they come into contact with man, they get killed, they get shot, they don't come off the quota. I wanted to show in one image and tell a story that these animals are coming into contact with humans. So all of a sudden, here's this moment. The bear's looking at me through the window, but the window's kind of dirty, it's iced up. So I opened up the window, and all of a sudden I'm sitting here 2 feet away from this female polar bear, and she's beautiful, and she's looking at me, and but I realized I couldn't. Her face was too much in shadow. It was so bright behind her, and there wasn't enough light coming out of this dark, dingy cabin. And all I had to put light on her face was I grabbed my laptop computer, which luckily had a little bit of battery left, and had put it onto a white screen, and I was holding it up about a foot from her face with a wide-angle lens, and I kept trying to fill in the shadows, and as she's just looking at me through this open window, also hoping that she's not going to come into the cabin, because obviously she's hungry and she's smelling the smells of our food, and she was great. Got a picture of her, and she just went on her way. And generally, I've seen 3,000 polar bears, I've seen 2,000 grizzly bears, and 1,000 black bears, and I've never once had this moment where this bear was out to eat me or kill me. I mean, they're these completely misunderstood top predators that are just out there trying to scratch out a living, and I'm always trying to give them that fair representation.